Let me start with what's going on, the breaking news. Two of these vessels, one of them is UAE, has announced that one of their ships was targeted while, by a missile while passing through the Strait of Hormuz. This is one, and the other, we had another report that it seems close to the Omani border or the Omani waters, and there was another attack on a vessel, which it seems that the report shows that the ship was boarded and seized. And the other point is the Saudi foreign ministry reacted to what has happened to UAE and their ship. It said we condemn in strongest way, the targeting of the Emirati tanker while passing through the Strait of Hormuz. We hold Iran responsible for the consequences of continuing the treacherous attacks. This is the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. We know that there are negotiations going on between Iran and Oman. Iranian foreign minister said that they didn't finalize it yet, but the talks are happening. What is the situation in the Strait of Hormuz?
Saudi Arabia's statement is basically one of desperation, because they are trying to mobilize proxies and mercenaries against the Yemeni armed forces and Ansarullah. And of course, in Saudi Arabia and the Emirates have very poor relations. Saudi Arabia is trying to encourage the Emirates to join them, but that would not bring about any real change. And it's not going to give them the upper hand against Yemen. The Yemeni armed forces today are much better equipped than they were before, and they've defeated the Saudis already. They defeated the Saudi Emirati combined forces with all their militias, and at a time when both countries were much better off and stronger than they are today. So shouldn't take anything that the Saudis say that seriously. But the Iranians are enforcing their rules over the Strait of Hormuz. These countries, they participated in the war against Iran. We hear, people who are linked to the Saudis, the Emiratis, linked to money, oil and gas money from the Persian Gulf, whether they're in these countries or in other regional countries, complain about Iran striking the innocent Arab regimes, Arab family dictatorships. When the Americans attack Iran, they attack these regimes. And of course, it's clear as day that these entities, they all contributed to war, they contributed to the murdering of Iranians. And no matter how much they try to play with words and pretend that these regimes are innocent, that's not going to change the reality. So the Iranians are going to continue shutting down the strait to ships that are linked to these regimes that help the United States and help the Israeli regime against Iran. And until the United States goes back to the to implement it to the MOU and implements it, and there will be things added to it too. I've spoken to someone who is knowledgeable, and he says that even though Gaza was a part of the negotiations before, it wasn't explicitly named, but you can tell from Article 1 that the Article 1 was not just about Lebanon, but since there was a war going on in Lebanon, it was named, but Gaza was a part of it. I've been told that Yemen and Gaza will be issues that the Iranians will demand to be put on the table and negotiated with the United States, and serious change be brought about with regards to the situation, meaning in occupied Palestine, but also with regards to Yemen. So as long as the United States refuses to go back to its commitments, the Iranians are not going to normalize the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is not fully closed. Ships do go through. Iran does allow some ships to pass through. But for these regimes in the US camp, it's not going to be normal. And even if the United States unblocks or ends the siege, that is not going to bring about normal trade in the Strait of Hormuz, because the MOU was not just about the siege, it was about more than the siege.
Yeah. What is your understanding of the situation? As I said, the Iranian foreign minister was not that much clear about at what stage is the negotiations are the negotiations between Iran and Oman. What is that? And if this is the first draft, are they getting to the first draft? They have reached the first draft. What is the situation there?
Well, Oman is under a lot of pressure from the United States. And the less the pressure, the more the progress. The Iranians, of course, are not going to allow red lines to be crossed. Iran will have control over the strait. The Iranians will, whether there are two routes for ships at the beginning, or later on, if there's one route later on, the Iranians will demand oversight on both the Omani side and on the Iranian side. They won't just close their eyes to what goes on alongside Omani shores. They have to know exactly what happens. And the issue of fees is something that the Iranians have said will exist. The Iranians are not going to relinquish that. And so if the Americans keep putting pressure on Oman, then the deal will be delayed. If the Americans back off, then we could have a deal. And then perhaps the Americans, if Trump is in his right mind, he will use this as an opportunity to revive the MOU. He could pretend that this was a great victory for the United States and that he's destroyed the Iranian Air Force, Navy, and whatever else it is that he's destroyed. He's destroyed the whole country, and we're all dying, and we're begging for a deal. And then he can say, this agreement was a huge achievement by the United States, and then he could move and implement the MOU and say, well, we're implementing the MOU because we destroyed Iran and we've achieved all of our objectives. And of course, the MAGA crowd, being a bunch of SEALs, they'll just clap, just like when Netanyahu goes to the Congress and the congressmen and women and the senators, they all clap like SEAls. And the MAGA crowd will clap for Trump like SEAls too. He can get away with it from when it comes to his cult following. But whether he can do that, whether the Zionist lobby will allow him to do that, whether the Israeli regime will allow him to do that, that's the big question. The rational thing to do right now for the United States is to bring an end to this. They lost the war, they lost siege warfare, and after that, they after signing the MOU, they restarted the war after they violated, because what Trump was trying to do with the MOU was try to achieve through the MOU what he couldn't achieve on the battlefield and what he couldn't achieve through siege warfare. So he refrained from implementing his side of the bargain and tried to undermine the Iranians in the Strait of Hormuz. And the Iranians were not dumb, they were not fools. They blocked him, and then he restarted the war, and that failed too. And then ultimately, the Iranians carried out some of their own strikes to teach him a lesson and tell him basically who's boss. And so the Iranian position today is stronger than what it was when the MOU was signed. The Iranian position now is stronger, and that's why the Iranians, if the United States ever is sane enough to go back to the MOU, they'll be demanding more than what they were demanding beforehand, which will mean greater stress on Gaza and on Yemen. Remember, one of the problems that Iran had with Gaza was that the Americans were saying we already have a deal, and that all the countries in the region, these Arab regimes in the Persian Gulf, Egypt, Turkey, and out beyond the region, Pakistan, all these governments went with Trump to Egypt, and they signed that horrible piece of paper and whitewashed Trump's crimes and forced really an agreement that was not good for the Palestinians in Gaza. And we're seeing the results right now. And none of these countries are doing anything about it. All of them express gratitude to Trump, and they all whitewash his crimes, and they were guarantors, but they've done nothing since. So whenever the Iranians would raise the issue of Gaza, the Americans would say, well, all of your neighbors, the entire region, has endorsed my ceasefire plan, so there's nothing to argue about. But the Iranians are going to be much more forceful this time.
There were three of those countries who signed that ceasefire between Israel and Palestine, naming Turkey, Egypt, and Pakistan. They're part right now. Sorry, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan. They are right now. They have yesterday. They signed a military pact, all of them coming together, which was reacted. We've seen the Iranian reaction. Iranian foreign minister said they're welcoming these sort of activities because that brings, some sort of independence from the United States, and Iran always welcomes that. This is what's going on. But the question would be, who's the target of this military pact? Are they going to use their forces against Yemen? Are they going to continue with the siege in Yemen? Are they going to, right now, for the time being, we don't see any sort of, Israeli attack on Saudi Arabia, or maybe the long run concern would be part, because we have to understand the attack on Doha, in my opinion, has changed totally the mindset with the GCC countries. They know that every time and any time Israel decides to attack them, they can attack them without having any sort of difficulties on the part of the United States. What is your understanding of the new military pact?
I don't think it's all that important. I think it's mostly directed, of course, towards Yemen and Ansarullah and the Yemeni armed forces, not towards Israel, the Israeli regime. I mean, some people in Turkey sometimes get upset with me, or some people in Pakistan, especially those close to the current government, get upset with me when I say this. This what I'm saying has nothing to do with the people of Pakistan or the people of Turkey who support the Palestinian cause, and the people of Saudi Arabia. They too support the Palestinian cause. But the reality is that the governments did nothing for the Palestinians during these 3 years of genocide. I mean, Turkey continued to do business with the Israeli regimes and does so as we speak. And the regime's oil goes through Turkey from the government in Baku. Pakistan, of course, had this relationship with Saudi Arabia for years. And of course, Pakistan has its own problems. It has a big problem with India, of course. It has a big problem with the Taliban. Ironically, Pakistan and the United States and the Saudis, among others, they helped bring the Taliban to power. But now the hostility is quite immense. So they have a problem with that. They have their own internal problems with the arrest of the prime minister and his removal, and the internal issues that exist in Pakistan, the former prime minister. And Turkey, of course, has its own problems, economic problems. I don't think that this has anything to do with Israel. It has more to do with Yemen. But what are they going to do against Yemen? Yemen can destroy Saudi critical infrastructure at will. And Saudi Arabia has nothing else. So what are they going to do? What can they do to Yemen that the Americans couldn't do? Do they want to invade Yemen? No, they can't do that. And the global economic situation, their own economic situation, isn't that great. And of course, their populations know that it was Yemen that stood up for the people of Gaza, not them. It was Yemen who was attacked by the United States because of their support for Gaza, not them. And so the people in their countries are not going to. I mean, forget online chatter. People in the countries, because what exists online is very different from the reality on the ground. We know that in Iran. If you look at like Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or any of these other online these social media apps, if you try to understand, let's say, Iran through them, you would be shocked and you'd probably have a heart attack when you saw the funeral, or when you saw that how Iran stood up against the empire, something that's unprecedented in contemporary history. Why? Because on the bots and the online foot soldiers that are paid for by governments, the trolls, these they create a very different. They create an image that's very different from reality. So ordinary people recognize that Yemen sacrificed for Gaza, and they also know that the Saudis, with the help of all these countries in the region, except for Iran, they carried out years of genocidal war against Yemen, and they failed. And it weakened Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has never recovered. And Yemen is stronger today than back then. So what are these governments going to do? If you go back to the 1960s, Egypt invaded Yemen, and it severely weakened the country. And one reason why they failed in the 1967 war and why they failed against the Israeli regime was because they were weakened in Yemen. They invaded the country, sort of like like Vietnam for the United States. So what are they going to do? Like Pakistan, of course, as I said, has this old relationship with Yemen, and Turkey, though I don't see it doing anything. I don't see it being directed against the Israeli regime. And again, some people very close to the Pakistani government or the armed forces get unhappy with this. When there's a difference between the state behavior and popular opinion. If you ask people across Turkey, do they favor transporting oil to Israel? I'm pretty sure you'd get 90-some% people saying no, but the government still does it. So this is not reflective of popular opinion. Iran, 50 years ago, before the revolution, we had a Shah who was, in the American camp. If the Shah was in power, of course, Iran would not. All these people who are in power now would be in prison or executed, and the Shah would be pursuing the same policies as everyone else across the region. So, but the Shah is not in power, and you have revolution took place, and the Islamic Republic of Iran is a state that is, in principle, supportive of the Palestinian people and willing to actively support them rather than just through the words. So I don't think anyone should be offended by this. It's just a reality. If that reality is something that they makes them unhappy, then they should move to alter that reality. But in any case, none of these countries condemned the U.S. attack on Iran. The war in Iran was never condemned by them, and they never took sides with the people of Yemen when the genocidal war was being carried out for years. Just like in Gaza, they starved Yemen, they slaughtered hundreds of thousands, they bombed schools, weddings, funerals. They did the same thing that the Israelis did to Gaza, but when it came to Yemen, it was okay because Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, which had a lot of money, were behind it. So that the war in Yemen failed, and it's they're not Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, its only way forward is to stop being the airbase of the United States and to learn to live with the people of Yemen, to learn to live with the people of Iran, to learn to live with the people of, in Iraq and uh, you know, and what have they done for Syria? What have these regimes done? I mean, Qatar, all these countries worked so many years and helped destroy Syria as a part of this U.S. project, Timber Sycamore, for this, in collaboration with the empire, the Israelis, the Americans, the Europeans, the Turkish government, Jordan. But then after it fell, the situation inside Syria today is worse than back then. Why aren't they helping? Why aren't they assisting the people of Syria who are living in misery right now? They have money. Or at least they had money last time I heard. So, no, I don't think that this grouping is going to have much impact. If it was a serious grouping, which was to help the Palestinian people, I would welcome it. And I would hope that the Iranians would give it its full support. I told you before, if Syria, forget these three countries, if Syria decided that it wanted to take its territory back from the Israeli regime, the first country to support it would be Iran. And so when I say this, some Syrians get angry with me. I think I may have told you once off before a show or after a show, maybe I said it on your show. Some Syrians say, "You mean you'd help Al Qaeda?" It is the priority that's important. The reason why Iran supported the government before the Al Qaeda government was because the United States wanted to undermine it. Iran was working against the empire. So those who say it was a sectarian war, no, they're using sectarianism to fool fools into believing that. Why? In Afghanistan, Iran did the exact opposite. And the Persian speakers, the Tajiks, the Uzbeks, the Shia community, many of them were angered with Iran because Iran was helping the Taliban get rid of the US occupation. So it was the exact opposite in Afghanistan. It was the minorities who collectively are the majority. So it's not a great idea in principle to have the Tajiks, the Uzbeks, and the Hazaras turning, not all of them, but many of them get angry with you. But in Afghanistan and in Syria, the objective was the same. So if the Syrian government today decides to turn against the empire, then I've no doubt that Iran would and Hezbollah would support it tomorrow, regardless of whether that makes the people who were opposed to this government or are opposed to this government unhappy. Because for Iran, the empire is the root of the problems, the biggest, it's the root of the problems in this region. And if the empire goes, many of the problems will gradually cease to exist or become minimal. But when you have an empire, they will constantly manipulate, they'll turn people against each other, countries against each other, groups against each other. And of course, the region will be what it has been for a very long time.
Actually, we had a statement on the part of Hezbollah mentioning that they're prepared to talk if Syrian government tries to, talk with them. They're open to talk with the government in Syria in order to resolve the issues, domestic issues and regional issues. I think that was one of the main signs, as you've mentioned, the priorities of the Hezbollah in the region as well.
Well, it's clear that the resistance is sending support to Hezbollah through the black market in Syria. And the Syrian government, in coordination with Americans and the Israelis, they've been trying to block those shipments of material. So we saw them, with great pride put on Syrian television a truck recently that they, I think it was and they showed that they had whip missiles and equipment for drones and things like that coming from Iraq. But so the Syrians are collaborating with the Americans and the Israelis, but in reality, they're weakening themselves because if Hezbollah is more successful against the Israeli regime, that strengthens the hand of Al Qaeda. That strengthens the hand of the Syrian government. But it was the Americans that brought them to power. Al Qaeda is on our side in Syria, um, as uh, as
Jake
what's his
Sullivan.
name? Jake Sullivan said in his email to Hillary Clinton. So obviously, it's not going to. You're not going to see that sort of change easily
Yeah. The
come
other
about.
point is, yeah, yesterday we've learned that Iraqi resistance said that they're not going to attack. They postponed the attack on Saudi Arabia because of the pressure in Iraq on them. And we've seen the footage of the Iraqi helicopters going to that region to monitor everything that is going on to avoid the attack. And so far, they have postponed the attack. And on the other hand, Yemen is fighting Saudi Arabia in their territory. We know that the proxies, Saudi proxies, are there. They're fighting with Yemen on the ground. And do you see any possibility for Yemen to go on the ground in Saudi Arabia, or they don't need necessarily to do that? They have to, if they decide to attack Saudi Arabia, it's going to be all with drones and missiles.
Well, first of all, with regards to Iraq, those helicopters cannot do anything. That's symbolic. There hasn't been an agreement to hold back for now. The Americans paid the Iraqi government $500 million of its own money, by the way. I mean, Iraqi oil, which is exported, all the money goes to the United States. Thanks to the stupidity of Saddam Hussein in his invasion of Kuwait and the UN Security Council resolutions, which have not been lifted, all that oil wealth goes to the United States, and then the United States decides if they want to give the Iraqi government its money or not. So they have a stranglehold over the Iraqi people. It's sort of like Venezuela. And so, first of all, the Americans gave $500 million of Iraq's own money back to Iraq to use. And so I'm sure that was one incentive. But also, I think there's a lull in fighting across the region right now. And we see, like in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, there's quiet for now. I think these are not unconnected for the time being. And with regards to Yemen, I mean, Yemen has imposed a siege on Saudi ships. Why? Because the Saudis started a war by bombing Yemen, but also because Saudi Arabia has imposed a siege on Yemen. I mean, the reason why they put a siege on Saudi oil tankers is because of the siege on Yemen. This is all about the siege on Yemeni women and children. The Saudis have been trying to strangle them for years. And now that Yemen is saying enough is enough in the West and in regional regimes, these that are bound to the West, they're all in shock. And what is Yemen doing? Well, they bombed the international airport, they starved the people, they bombed the port. So they shouldn't be all that surprised. But there's no reason why Yemen should enter Saudi Arabia. Saudi critical infrastructure, its oil exports, can be stopped by Yemen very easily. And the Saudis are hurting badly, especially with what's going on in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. So Yemen doesn't need to, go into Saudi Arabia. They can just pile on the pressure. And Saudi doesn't have that sort of money. They've spent hundreds of billions in the war against Yemen. They've wasted hundreds of billions in these, huge mega projects, which didn't get like the line and things like that. And it's a family dictatorship. People get their money. People at the top, just like in these other countries. So Saudi Arabia is not in an ideal situation, nor any of the countries in the Persian Gulf. And this is, by the way, something that I think the Americans should be worried about, because look at the situation in Japan. The Japanese economy is in trouble, and the Japanese are maybe forced to start selling their bonds in the United States to prop up the currency. And then the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Kuwaitis, who are losing lots of money and have lost a lot over the past 5.5 months. They're going to start needing. They're going to start. They're going to need a lot of their money back uh, to sustain their economies because they are they consume a lot. They consume more than probably any other country in the world. They export oil and gas and refined goods, and but they consume a huge amount of goods. And so a lot of so Trump was hoping to get trillions of dollars from the Persian Gulf to go to the U.S. economy, but what he's done is basically stop that from happening. And now we will begin to see the reverse. There are clear indications that money is being withdrawn from the West to pay for costs in these countries. And if this continues for much longer, a lot of money will have to go back. So none of this is good for the U.S. economy. But going back to the question, the Saudis are under a lot of pressure, and so I think Yemen is in a strong position. All they have to do is enforce the siege. The Strait of Hormuz is closed for now. Saudi Arabia, the smart thing to do is just to negotiate with Yemen and end the war. It's quite amazing that they're unwilling to do that.